So just to say a bit about what I'll be talking about this evening. This week we're running a course called The Road to Full Potential. And that's been introduced a little bit yesterday and in the meditation yesterday and this morning. And what we're talking about is the Buddhist path formulated. So one way of formulating the Buddhist path is what's called the threefold way, and that's ethics, meditation, and wisdom. That's also called Sila, Samadhi, and Prajna. So the Pali words are Sila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Ethics, meditation, and wisdom. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Buddhist ethics this evening, and I'm going to specifically talk about speech. So speech is very, very important in Buddhist ethics. And I'm going to talk about that in relation to this idea of potential, in relation to the idea of us transforming ourselves. So I'm going to talk about ethics as a transformational practice. And I was thinking a bit about this today when I was thinking about what to say this evening. And I was thinking, like, language and communication. It's almost like the pinnacle of if we think about human beings and we think about our intelligence and this reflexive consciousness that we have as human beings. We could get into debating this, whether and to what degree this exists in the animal kingdom and so on. But it's unlikely that any other creatures have the level of consciousness that we have, the level of sentience that we have, that have this kind of well-developed, very, very sophisticated self-reflexive consciousness. And certainly no other creatures have the skills that we have and the ability that we have to communicate. So there is nothing in the known universe like human speech or language or the way that we converse. So it's absolutely incredible. I've been thinking a bit about this over the last few weeks. I've been learning Hindi for the last couple of years, and I put it down for quite a long time. And during the lockdown, I've been picking it up again. And as part of that, I'm learning to read Devanagari, which is the script that Hindi is written in. And as a lot of you will know, learning a new language is incredible. Like, it just brings home to you the sort of awe-inspiring nature of language and just what an incredible thing it is. But also then learning a completely new script. I've just been finding it amazing. It's absolutely incredible. So it's this incredible ability that we have to communicate in beautiful and subtle and incredibly sophisticated ways. And that communication has power. So it has the power to bring about incredible benefit to the world. If one thinks about, for example, yesterday Subhadra Mati mentioned Martin Luther King. And when you think about his speeches and the amount of incredible inspiration and benefit that those brought about, or we think about, say, like the poetry of someone like Rabindranath Tagore that I was just reading today. Just incredible potential that we have in speech and language. And it's very, very important in Buddhism. And I wanted to start by just talking about an episode from the Buddha's life and sort of bringing it right back to the Buddha and giving an example of how the Buddha would speak and how the Buddha would converse, and sort of drawing out some meaning from that. And I'm going to come back to this story as we go through the evening. But the story concerns the Buddha right at the end of his life, and it concerns him and his friend Ananda. So I don't know if any of you tuned in to the last time I gave a talk here in the shrine room. A couple of you may have done. I was talking about compassion on that evening, and I told a story that also concerned the Buddha and Ananda when they were both quite a bit younger. But this story, we're coming back to the Buddha and Ananda, and it's right at the end of the Buddha's life. So the Buddha is about to die, basically. It's very, very poignant. So it's obviously a very, very significant moment for him and his followers. And it's a significant moment that's been passed down to us through the generations and through the lineage of teachers. And Ananda is absolutely distraught, basically. So he really loves the Buddha. Ananda is known as a very, very affectionate and very open-hearted man. And his teacher is about to die. So it's not just his teacher, actually. I don't think that does it justice. The Buddha was a very, very, very dear friend of Ananda's and a huge inspiration to him. So the Buddha and Ananda spent, it's said that Ananda was with the Buddha for the last 25 or 30 years of his life. He was his constant companion. And Ananda is distraught, basically. He's really, really upset that the Buddha is about to die. And the Buddha's told him that he's about to die. And the Buddha, he responds in two ways. So the first thing is that he's quite direct with Ananda. And he says to him, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he says to him something along the lines of, Ananda, have I not taught you that everything is impermanent? Everything that lives must die. I have this human body, which is finite, and you know that I will pass away at some stage. And he's slightly kind of, in a very, very friendly way, he almost rebukes Ananda and says to him, look, what have I spent the last however long teaching you? And it's very, very direct, but this really, really wakes Ananda up. So there's that, but there's also the last thing that we know the Buddha said to Ananda was that he really, really rejoiced in his good qualities. So in front of this whole gathering of people, so a lot of people were starting to gather because they knew that the Buddha was going to die. And in front of that gathering, publicly, the Buddha rejoices in Ananda, basically. That means he celebrates his good qualities. He draws attention to his good qualities, and he praises Ananda in front of everyone. So he says something like, Ananda, who is so faithful, who is so kind, who has been this loyal friend and companion to me. And he also says that this lovely thing that he says, everybody is always pleased to see Ananda. He's so well loved in our community. Everybody's always pleased to see him. And I just think that's incredibly beautiful. What a wonderful thing to do for somebody. Just as it's almost like a sort of a parting gift from the Buddha to Ananda. So Ananda will always be left, with that sort of final reminder of the Buddha's kindness. So what we're trying to do as Buddhists, or what I'm trying to do as a practicing Buddhist, is I'm trying to become more like the Buddha. I'm trying to basically go from where I am now to the kindness and compassion and wisdom and awareness of the Buddha. And one of the things that helps me to do that is through practicing what we call the Buddhist precepts. So this is a point in the evening where I was just saying to Ipali earlier, I'm used to teaching in front of a room full of people. So this would be the point where I would say, put your hand up if you've heard of the precepts. So you can virtually put your hand up. Obviously, I don't know, I can't see you there, but a lot of you will know what the precepts are. I want to talk about them a little bit because 4 of the 10 Buddhist precepts concern speech. So they're very, very important in terms of the precepts. And you could think of the precepts in terms of kind of ethical guidelines that as a Buddhist, I'm trying to adhere to. But I think it's important to understand what the precepts are and what they aren't. And I think in order to do that, we need to go back to the Buddha, basically. So we've started with the story of the Buddha, and we need to go back to the Buddha to understand what the precepts are. So the Buddha didn't sit down and kind of invent Buddhism one day. He didn't think, okay, I'm gonna come up with this school of thought, and I'm gonna teach it and and it's going to be called Buddhism because I'm the Buddha, and that'll sound great, and the precepts are going to be the rules of this new thing that I thought up. It wasn't like that at all. So where the precepts come from is the Buddha's deep experience of wisdom and the Buddha's vision, basically. So the Buddha had a vision, and his enlightenment is the experience of that vision, the experience of the depth of that vision. And his teaching, all of his teaching, is an attempt to communicate that vision to us so that we can practice his teaching. And what he saw very, very deeply is what we call conditionality. So he saw that everything arises in dependence on conditions, and that we're not separate from those conditions. So we are to some degree agents of change. So we can influence the situation around us. We are both part of those conditions, but we also are an agent that creates those conditions as well. And we can have an influence, and we can change ourselves, and we can change the world that we're in, and we can have an influence on the people around us, basically. And that's very, very important, because what the Buddha saw very deeply is that when we act in ways that are unskillful, so for example, when we, in terms of our speech, when we speak in a way that is false, or when we speak in a way that is divisive, or when we speak in a way that is harsh to people, that not only causes suffering to them, but it causes suffering to us as well. So we can bring about a tremendous amount of suffering by the way that we speak, but then also that the reverse is true as well. So when we speak in a way that is truthful and beneficial and kindly and helpful and harmonious, we have the potential to bring about a tremendous amount of not just goodness into the world. I mean, it's tempting to say that. On a mundane level, that's what you could think, but it's not just that. It's that actually when we practice, kindly, helpful, truthful speak, and when we speak when it's the right time to speak, if we do that in relation to this ideal, what it actually does is it helps us to move towards that ideal. So it helps us to become more like the Buddha. It's interesting. So the Pali word for precept, which is sort of roughly translated as training principle, is Sikkhapadam. Sikkhapadam. So Sikha is it's a very interesting word. So it means something like education, or to educate or to learn. But I think it means that in the purest sense. So I looked into this a little bit, and I looked into the etymology of the word education. And it's interesting, to educate comes from the Latin word educare, which means to bring forth, or to bring up. So that's interesting if you think about that in relation to the precepts. What the precepts do is they bring forth something in us. So it doesn't give us something that's not already there. It calls forth the positive qualities that we already have within us, and it brings forth those qualities. So by practicing the precepts, we move from where we are now to where the Buddha is, which is a state of more wisdom, more awareness, more compassion. And through practicing the precepts, through practicing the ethical precepts, and through practicing the speech precepts, we move closer to where the Buddha is. So specifically in relation to the speech precepts, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, okay, so how do we do that? What do I really want to communicate about that? And I was thinking the important thing to say, first and foremost, is that speaking or communicating skillfully is primarily a mindfulness practice. So it's not just about saying the right thing or writing the right thing, or it has to start with mindfulness. So it has to start with awareness. It has to start with awareness of ourselves, and it has to start with awareness of whoever it is that we're communicating with. Because if we don't have that, we're actually not really communicating. All we're doing is speaking, or all we're doing is writing or addressing. if we're not aware of ourselves, and when I say aware of ourselves, what I mean is aware of how we're feeling, aware of what's going on for us, and also aware of what our motivation is as well. So what's our motivation in actually wanting to communicate? And the more we can purify our motivation, then the more that will resemble the communication of the Buddha, the more that will be ethically positive. And we also need to cultivate an awareness of other as well. And I think to do that, we need a degree of receptivity. So we can't really practice communication that is ethically positive unless there is a large amount of receptivity there, unless we're aware of ourselves, unless we're aware of the other. So I was thinking, like, what would be a negative example of this? And it's interesting, isn't it? Say, for example, when somebody's very, very intoxicated. So say, for example, somebody's under the influence of drugs or drink. They can do a lot of talking, but it's not actually communication, because there's no awareness of self and there's no awareness of other. So that person may think that there's a self-awareness there, and people can get, very sort of self-righteous and so on. But there's not really any consideration or any awareness at the most basic level. So it's not really connecting, and it's not really ethically positive. I was thinking about this even actually in relationship to myself. So this put me in mind of I've been trying to become a bit more aware around a certain way that I can communicate in a certain context sometimes, and I'll say a bit about what that context is. So it's a weekend morning, usually a Sunday morning, and I live with my partner. Just the two of us live together, and we've got this little kitchen table that we sit at. We often have, discussions over breakfast and so on. And I started to notice that sometimes I can slightly get on one with certain topics. So I'm ashamed to say, even sometimes about certain aspects of Buddhism or Buddhist practice, what I noticed was happening a few times was I would kind of, the way me and her talk about it is I slightly get on my high horse. I kind of get up there and I'm talking from a place where I sort of think I have the answers, and I'm very, very determined to sort of emphatically say what the answers are, and I'm right, and this person or persons are wrong about this, and I sort of communicate that in quite an animated way. Often under the influence of caffeine. And I really clocked that I was doing that, and saw that actually that's really not communicating. So that's something that I've been kind of working on over the last few months. So one thing is about a year ago, I kind of stopped drinking caffeine. And I noticed that I had much less of a tendency to get on my high horse. And yeah, so those are kind of a couple of examples. If somebody's under the influence of something, or if somebody's intoxicated. Whereas for the Buddha, it was never, ever like that. So as an enlightened being, it was interesting, Subhadramati last night. I love this thing that she was saying about with the Buddha, there was such a level of awareness that there would only be love. So one way of thinking about the Buddha is the Buddha didn't need to think about being aware. He just would be aware all of the time. So there was just this awareness. And I think we can really see that with the story about Ananda. So he doesn't need to think about what to say to Ananda. He just seems to have this awareness around what it is that Ananda needs. So he knows that he's distraught, and so he thinks, okay, the best thing I can do for him is to give him this encouragement. So he's very, very affectionate, he's very, very kind, and he's very, very encouraging. And that would just come completely naturally to the Buddha. He wouldn't need to think about that. Because of the way his consciousness is, that just comes completely naturally. And I was thinking about this in relation to the founder of our movement, Bhante Sangharakshita. So he said somewhere that he thought it was only possible to speak the truth to one person at a time. And I thought that was really, really interesting. It's only possible to speak the truth to one person at a time. And I think what he means by that is to really, really communicate something that is personally true to somebody, you need to know what it is that's going on for them, and you need to know where they are, what sort of situation they're in, and you need to know something about their life. And you also need to have a degree of awareness around yourself and a degree of awareness around the other person as well. So the Buddha would always speak in that way. He would speak in a way that was kindly and compassionate, and in a way that was transformational for the people that would hear it. So the Buddha's life is full of stories of people that are brought to meet the Buddha. He speaks to them, and somehow he always seems to know the right thing to say to that person at that time. And that's often hugely transformational for them. So the Buddha's life story is full of people that hear his teaching or hear what he has to say to them specifically. You know, it's not like they read a book by the Buddha, or they often even heard a public address. It's him speaking to them. He knows exactly what to say to them. And that's often very, very transformational. So often sometimes people would gain enlightenment on the spot, or sometimes people would decide to follow him for the rest of their life on the spot. So for us, I'm just thinking a little bit about, okay, for us unenlightened beings, how do we do that? How do we start to move towards the way a Buddha would speak? Or how do we start to be ethically positive in relation to our speech? And I think a few things come to mind. So one thing is that we need to do a lot of that work outside of our speech. Actually, having a regular meditation practice is probably the best thing that we can do for our communication. If we're practicing awareness and deepening our awareness regularly, and we're doing the mindfulness of breathing, and we're doing the metta bhavana, that will be incredibly transformational for the way we communicate. And we can also reflect as well. So we can reflect before and after we speak. And the more we meditate, the more we'll be able to speak, the more we'll be able to reflect before we speak and think, actually, is this the right thing to say to this person? And is it the right time to say it? You know, what sort of effect is this going to have if I say this? And then we'll be able to reflect afterwards. Was that the right thing to say? You know, have I caused any harm? Was that helpful? Was that unhelpful? And then the last thing I want to say is that we can practice. There's a lovely, lovely practice in Triratna, which is called rejoicing in merits. And that's basically what the Buddha did to Ananda in this story, is he rejoiced in his merits. So he celebrated his good qualities. And that's a practice that anyone can do. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful practice. So when we rejoice in someone, what we're doing is we're speaking from our highest potential to their highest potential. And we're calling forth their highest potential. So in naming someone's good qualities, what we're doing is encouraging those qualities to grow. So we do this a lot in our community in Triratna. We encourage a regular thing of rejoicing in people's merits, whether it's publicly. Often, you know, when we run retreats, the team of people will be running a retreat and we rejoice in that context, or we might just do it one-to-one to a friend. But it's a really, really lovely thing to do. I actually learned to do this practice when I was at school, and it was incredible. We had a teacher who, I was in sixth form at the time, so it's like 17 years old or something like that. And so that's about 30 years ago. And I remember it really, really well, is the teacher set it up. We were a small group of people, only 8 or 9 of us. And we went round and we each named some good qualities in everyone else that was in the group. And it was really, really powerful. It was almost like our hearts really, really opened in that practice. I'd never come across anything like it at the time. I was just a 17-year-old kid. And it was really amazing that the teacher, you know, that my teacher at that school actually knew how to do that and was inclined to do that. And all of us afterwards said what an incredibly powerful thing it was. And there was a couple of people in that group that I know had very low self-esteem, and it gave them a real boost. So yeah, I think that's a really, really wonderful thing to do. As I said, when we rejoice in somebody, it's like we're relating to their highest potential. And in that, we call their potential forth. And I think when we're in the presence of skillful speech, or when we're in the presence of very, very ethically positive speech, yeah, it just has a tremendously transformative effect. I mean, I've mentioned this quite a few times in my teaching, but I had a job for 6 or 7 years where the main part of my job was to facilitate communication workshops with older people, so people who are like in their 80s and 90s. And I used to go around to like sheltered housing schemes and day centers and things like that. And I would get people together, and I would run these communication workshops with people. And we used to spend the first session getting people to reflect on their life and what their values were that had sort of been present in their life, and getting people to look back on their life and say 1 or 2 things that they were proud of. And what you'd often find was these were people who were not used to being asked to talk about something so deep and so personal and so meaningful to them. And it was incredible. It was such a beautiful process. And facilitating that for me really brought me to life and really opened my heart. And for those people, it was just also very, very transformational. And I often used to leave those workshops and those discussion groups almost like I was in a higher state of consciousness. Well, not almost, actually in a higher state of consciousness. And that was just through communicating in such a way that gave people the opportunity to open their hearts. That opened my heart. And that enabled real communication to happen that was in the service of higher values. And that was transformational for me and for them as well. So it's amazing the potential that this kind of communication can have. And that's why it's so important for us to think about that, and also think about it in relation to the Buddha and to these higher values, and to think about, well, how would he behave, and how can we move towards that? And how can we make the way we speak and the way we communicate more like the way the Buddha would do naturally? Okay, so I think that's enough talking from me for now. And what we're going to do is stop, and we're going to have a period of meditation. So I was saying that one of the best ways that we can work on our communication, or one of the best ways that we can move towards being more ethically positive, is to practice meditation. So we're going to have a period of meditation now for about 20 or 25 minutes. So Ippolite's just going to dim the lights. So wherever you are at home, if you're able to find a good meditation posture, you could sit on some cushions or on a chair, or even just on the sofa if that's all that's available to you. If you like to get into your meditation posture, and we're going to do a session of the mindfulness of breathing. So first of all, just relaxing. And you want to be in a posture where you're alert but comfortable. So you want a fairly straight back, but that also needs to be relaxed. And you want to think about having something to put your hands on. So you can either put them on a cushion like this, or you can put them on your thighs. And you're in a posture that's comfortable for you to sit in for the next 20 to 25 minutes. And just becoming aware of your physical experience as we start to go into the meditation. So first of all, just feeling the weight of your body on the cushions or on the mat or whatever it is that you're sitting on or lying on. So just letting gravity do its thing, feeling the points of contact, your chair or your mat. And you could be aware of the sounds around you. Even the smells. I've got this beautiful smell of lilies in the shrine room. So just tuning into your body and tuning into your environment. And then just noticing anywhere where there's any tension in the body. So I always need to do a little bit of letting go in my shoulders. It's where I carry a lot of tension. So you can relax in your shoulders, in your face, or your knees, or anywhere where you're holding tension. Just letting that go. And then starting to become aware of the breath. So noticing that your body is breathing, that you've been doing that all this time, and now you're starting to bring some awareness to that. So breathing through the nose. And noticing the rising and falling of your shoulders. You might even notice the breath in the hands. Noticing the belly, the chest area. So your whole body is breathing. And what you can start to do is tune into that. So it's like you're trying to find a deeper relationship with the breath. Through awareness, you're trying to enter the breath more and more. You don't need to breathe in any special way, but just noticing the breath just as it is, noticing your body around it just as it is. And as you do that, just noticing thoughts as they arise and using the breath as an opportunity and a vehicle to just come back to awareness of your body and awareness of your breathing. You don't need to make a fuss about it. You can just gently let go of thoughts as they arise and focusing your awareness back on the breath. And I'm moving into the first stage of the meditation. So if it's helpful for you, just counting after the out breath. So breathe in, breathe out, say 1. Breathe in, breathe out, say 2. Breathe in, breathe out, say 3. So on up to 10. And then starting again at 1. So focusing most of your attention on the breath and just gently marking after the out breath. So the focus of the meditation is the breath and not the counting. And every time you notice that your mind is wandering, just bringing it back to the breath and to the body. And starting again with the counting if you need to. And again, just noticing if there's tension in the body, if there's any way you need to relax. Softening in the belly, softening in the face. So when you're ready in your own time, if it's helpful for you moving into the next stage where you're counting before the in-breath. So say 1, breathe in, breathe out. Say 2, breathe in, breathe out, and so on up to 10. And just doing that in your own time, developing your own relationship of awareness with the breath. And perhaps noticing how each breath is subtly different. How the breath changes, how the body changes around it. And then in your own time, moving into the third stage, so just drop in the counting. Having a sense of the whole of the breath, so the breath entering the body, leaving the body, feeling the journey of the breath through your throat, your lungs, the belly area. Having a sense of your body around the breath. So when you're ready, moving into the final stage. So moving from this breadth of awareness that we have, the whole breath entering and leaving the body, the journey of the breath, and moving to a more focused, pinpoint awareness of where the breath enters the body. So just seeing if you can feel those minute physical sensations. The top of the lip, the nostrils, and focusing our awareness right down. And seeing if we can do that while still having an overall sense of awareness of our body. And having a sense of enjoyment of the breath. So these last few minutes being aware, the pleasure of the simple act of breathing, and an awareness of that. And then beginning to bring the meditation to a close in whatever way is right for you, perhaps bringing others to mind, having a sense of gratitude. And then when you're ready, coming out of your meditation posture and opening your eyes. Okay, so we're going to take a tea break now for 10 minutes or so. So you can go away, go to the loo, grab yourself a cup of tea, whatever you need to do. And we'll be back here in 10 minutes. So about 8:05 UK time. So yeah, we'll see you in 10 minutes or so. Okay, great. Yeah, so welcome back, everyone. So we've got another hour or so together, and I'm going to talk for a few more minutes, and then I'm going to invite some questions. So I know we've already got some questions in the chat, and if you've got more questions, then do put them in the chat, put a little queue in front of them. And that's what we'll do. So I talked a little bit in the first half about this idea of ethics and what it means to practice Buddhist ethics, and particularly in relationship to speech. I just want to say, like, when it gets talked about in Buddhist texts, traditionally, this is what gets called perfect speech, or even right speech. And I think that's not a helpful label. I think it's actually a bit of a misnomer. I think it would be better to think in terms of enlightened communication. So I think that's what we're aspiring to, is enlightened communication. Or, one could even say beautiful or wonderful communication. So we're trying to communicate more and more from a place of value, and we're trying to communicate to the values of others. So it's not just about saying the right thing or thinking what the right thing is to say. That actually is much, much, much deeper than that. It's by speaking in a particular way, with a certain motivation and with a level of awareness, we can... well, it's interesting. I was thinking, I gave that example in the first half about doing those groups with older people. And I was also thinking about a story from Sangharakshita's life, where he was talking about addressing hundreds of thousands of followers of Dr. Ambedkar, the great social reformer in India, who led millions and millions of people to convert to Buddhism. Dr. Ambedkar had just died, and Sangharakshita has talked many times about being in India when that happened and addressing huge groups of Dr. Ambedkar's followers. And he talks about something basically like a force moving through him. And I think that's what can happen. It's not just us speaking or us saying something. Actually, at its peak, what we're doing is actually letting something of value speak through us. And if it's not too, I hope it doesn't sound too grand for me to say it, but I certainly had a sense of that with that example that I was talking about, where it no longer feels like you're thinking about what to say. You just let something move through you. It can feel like that even sometimes with a very, very positive conversation with a friend, can't it? I think it's a bit like playing a musical instrument, where, for those of you that do, at a certain point, you're able to just relax and kind of let it flow. And if we're doing that in the service of higher values, then something is moving through us. The other thing to say is we will get that wrong. We will fall short of those ideals. We will certainly fall short of how the Buddha would behave. But the thing about ethical practice is it is a practice. And the whole point of practice is that we do something in order to bring about a change. We won't always necessarily get it right. But if we don't get it right, we need to be able to have the awareness to respond to that. But because I guess I'm a bit worried by saying what I've said, that somehow it's like we all suddenly need to, we sort of have this expectation that we can all suddenly be perfect, which is, it is a path, and ethics it is a practice, practicing Buddhist ethics. But it is a practice in the sense that it's something that we do, and through the doing of that, it brings about a change. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about was to kind of in relation to this. So I wanted to talk about an archetypal Buddha figure. So we've been talking about the Buddha this evening, and so you'll know that he was a human being who became enlightened. But many of you will also be familiar with the fact that we have archetypal Buddha figures. So Buddha figures who are not sort of real historical figures from the past, but figures that represent the qualities of the enlightened mind. And the Buddha represent doesn't sound quite right. The Buddha that's associated with, or that embodies enlightened communication, is a figure called Virochana. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about his qualities and the way that they relate to this idea of enlightened communication. So the first thing to say about Virochana is that he holds at his chest, or in his heart, he has what's called the Dharma chakra, which is the wheel of the Dharma. And what that represents is basically what I was talking about in the first half, is that enlightened communication comes out of practicing the whole Buddhist path. So we can't just practice one limb or one spoke, as it were, in isolation. Same as if you try and ride a bicycle that's only got one spoke, you're not going to get very far. So it comes out of the practice of the whole Buddhist path. So we need to practice the whole path in order to move towards that ideal of enlightened communication. And at the same time, we would want to do that as part of the whole path. It's a joyful part of practicing the path. So he has the Dharma chakra at his heart. Sometimes when you see Virochana, he's holding the Dharma chakra, and also his hands are in what's called the Dharma chakra mudra, or Dharma chakra position, which is like this. And that also represents this wheel, which represents the Buddhist path. And the other thing to say about him is that he's an archetypal Buddha that has a color associated with him, and the color is white. So I think that's very, very interesting, isn't it? So he has this color associated with him, which is white. I have I don't know whether to say a close relationship, but I meditate on this Buddha figure every day, and I really, really love this figure. And for me, I had a fascination with the color white before I kind of came across Virochana. And then when I found out that the color associated with him was white, I found that very, very fascinating. And for me, I think what white represents is its receptivity. So it's subtlety and its receptivity. And I think that's very, very interesting when you think that Virochana is this Buddha of enlightened communication, is that it's showing us that what we need primarily is receptivity. It put me in mind, actually, of, I don't know if any of you know the artist Robert Rauschenberg, but he produced a series of paintings which were just white canvases, basically, which I fell in love with those paintings when I saw them. And it was that work that inspired the composer John Cage's piece 4 minutes 33, which is a piece of music which is 4 minutes 33 long, where nothing is played, basically. There's just 3 movements, and it's tasset, 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 which is silence, silence, silence. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? So thinking about actually that real communication comes out of silence. So that may or may not be literally true, but what it means is that we need to be receptive. And the other thing about Virochana is that he's supported, got actually a small image of him here. You might not be able to see this very well, but maybe Ippolit can tell me if that's clear or not. Okay, so you'll notice here that Virochana is supported by 2 lions on his throne. So he sits on a throne of lotuses, and that throne is supported by lions. And it's said that the enlightened speech is called the lion's roar. So enlightened communication is called the lion's roar. And I think that's amazing, because it brings to mind for me like images of the sort of nobility and the beauty of a lion. And also it's said that when the lion roars, all other creatures in the jungle are silent, basically. Because, well, in the lion's case, literally for kind of obvious reasons, but it's like when the Buddha speaks, there's nothing that can come close to that, basically. There's nothing else that you can say about that. So high is the value of his communication. And then the last thing to say about Virochana is that he also has an element associated with him, which is Akasha. And Akasha means something like ether or space or infinite space. But in that space, it's not a dead space. It's a space of infinite potential. So the potential, this is a lovely way to kind of dovetail back to what we were talking about at the start of the evening, talking about this idea of us meeting our potential, and this course being called The Road to Full Potential. Akasha is a space that is infinitely pregnant with possibility, that wisdom and awareness are constantly arising in this space. And this is the space that Virochana inhabits. And it's like he's constantly communicating the Dharma just with his presence and embodying that enlightened communication. Okay, so if I've inspired you, maybe you could go away and look at some images of Virochana for yourself, but that's a little bit about him. And this ideal of the ideal of enlightened communication. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to see if people have got questions, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time answering people's questions. So maybe I'll give you all a minute or so. I think some questions have come in already, so yeah.
There's quite a few questions already.
Okay, great.
Shall I say them and you?
Yeah, you say them. I'll try and answer them.
Okay. So a couple of questions around the difficulty of speech when wanting to speak truthfully, but being afraid that might hurt somebody else.
Yeah. Okay. So do you want to leave that as a general, or do you want to say...
Should I try to go on the specific questions? Or?
Yeah.
So one is, I struggle with the idea of not hurting anyone with truthful speech. So in terms of speaking up, or about being truthful, particularly if someone's delusional or something.
Right, okay. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. So I'll just say a little bit about that. So the sort of traditional guidelines for when to speak are if it's truthful, if it's beneficial, and if it's timely. So beneficial being like if it's kindly, if it's helpful, and if it leads to harmony as opposed to discourse. And it also needs to be truthful. It also needs to be the right time to say it as well. So the Buddha was, interestingly though, the Buddha said that sometimes he would need to say something even if it wasn't welcome. So that's an interesting way to look at it, isn't it? But I think we need a tremendous amount of awareness in order to practice this, basically. And I think it's good to just bear those things in mind, basically. Are we speaking the truth? Is it likely to bring benefit? Is it helpful? Is it likely to cause harmony? And also, is it the right time to say it? So maybe we can reflect a little bit on that before we speak, and not just say something because we think it needs to be said, or if we think it needs to be said, really go back and look at what our motivations are and what are the likely consequences. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that you can say something which may bring benefit, even if it's going to upset somebody. But you'd need to do that in a very, very careful way and with a lot of consideration. But it was interesting. Nyanadaya was saying one of the questions was maybe about what if somebody's delusional. That's quite interesting. My background is I've worked in the charity sector for a long, long time, and I did a lot of work with the Alzheimer's Society, actually. And one of the things that the way you can communicate with someone with dementia is in the advanced stages of dementia. If somebody is may not have a memory that stretches, for over a period of minutes even sometimes. So if somebody's delusional and they think, for example, that they're, I don't know, say, for example, in their own home in the 1970s and their children are about to come around, even though that that their children are now in their 50s or 60s or something like that, it's not necessarily going to help that person to just deny what they're saying or to challenge them if they're delusional. You have to think about, okay, well, what are the consequences of that going to be? So so I think truth in that sense is, well, I think you would need to think about that, basically. I think technically that might be untruthful, but speaking the truth to somebody like that isn't necessarily going to help them. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So a question from going back to the beginning of your
Mm-hmm.
talk, when you were referring to Sangharaj to saying that you can only speak truthfully just to one individual.
Yeah.
Someone, Isaac, was asking, how can you address a crowd or communicate truthfully to a larger audience?
Yeah. That's a good question, isn't it? I mean, if Bhante was still around, I'd quite like to ask him what he meant by that phrase. But what I think he means by that is that, like, say, for example, if somebody's asking a question, it's very, very hard to answer a specific question in general terms, if that makes sense. So sometimes when you're doing this kind of teaching, for example, you might get a question around, like a question that often comes up is somebody saying, what should I do about this situation in my life if somebody's really hurt me, or, basically talking about something that's quite abstract. And unless you know the person and you know the circumstances of their life quite well, it's actually very difficult to answer that question. And I think really that's what Bhante was referring to, is it's very hard to answer a question really truthfully unless you know the circumstances of someone's life. But of course, that doesn't mean that you can't address a large number of people. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here now. I hope that what I'm saying is somehow relates to you in your existence and is helpful for you. And that certainly has its place, and we do that a lot at the Buddhist Center. We teach to large numbers of people, before the center closed, actually at the center, now online. But it's also a reason why we place an emphasis on friendship and communication in the context of friendship, because it's in the context of friendship, when you really get to know someone, that it's sometimes easier to say things that you wouldn't be able to say otherwise, or to have a sense of what that person might need in their life at that time. And I think actually that's one of the things that can differentiate Triratna from some other Buddhist movements or other religious movements, is if you're only seeing a teacher occasionally and you go to kind of a large gathering and you listen to them and so on, that's great, and that can be very, very helpful. But actually having a relationship with somebody that is wiser than you are and actually knows you in your life, they're probably able to offer something which is much more pertinent to you and much more insightful and useful. So I think both have their place. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Right.
A couple of questions on archetypal Buddhas. So Sarah asks, how do you meditate on a particular Buddha archetype? And James says, if we have the Buddha, why do we need archetypal Buddhas at all?
Yeah. Oh, those are very good questions. So one question was, how do you meditate on an archetypal Buddha? And the other question was, if we have the Buddha, why do we need archetypal Buddhas? So the first one is, how you meditate on a Buddha is, so I was talking about a specific meditation practice, which is called a sadhana practice. And in Triratna, we generally only teach those practices after ordination, basically. So I was given a specific meditation practice when I was ordained, and that's the practice that I do. But you can meditate on an archetypal Buddha just by bringing them to mind. So if you feel very inspired by a particular Buddha that you come across, that you might have seen a picture of or that you read about or so on, you can just bring them to mind in your meditation. Just try and cultivate that openness and receptivity, and then bring that figure to mind, or bring an aspect of that figure to mind. It might be a color, or it might be the position of their hands, or it might just be the whole image, and just see what happens with that, and kind of follow your inspiration, really. Why do we need the archetypal Buddhas? Well, I don't know if we do sort of need them. I mean, the archetypal Buddhas weren't kind of invented. It's important to say that. It wasn't like somebody said, the Buddha sort of commissioned a graphic designer one day and said, come on, I need some colorful Buddhas. Nobody really knows where these figures come from. And it's sort of hard to talk about them in a sense, because they kind of neither exist in the sort of usual sphere of reality that we think of as being reality, and nor do they not exist either. They come from deep meditative experience, and they, in a strange sort of mysterious kind of way, they do have a reality of their own. I mean, when I was introduced to this meditation practice on Virochana, it was absolutely incredible. The figure was so real and so present and so powerful that I actually couldn't, I'm speaking figuratively because it was in meditation, but I couldn't actually face the figure because it was such a powerful experience being in the presence of Virochana. That happened the first time I was given the practice, and it's never ever happened since in 7 years of doing this practice. But the very first time, that's what happened. But what the archetypal Buddhas represent is, it's almost like the Buddha, the enlightened, the experience of enlightenment is so rich and so beautiful and so multifaceted that it cannot be contained just in one consciousness. And we have, I think, with the Buddha, we have the experience as communicated by a human. And it's almost like in the archetypal Buddhas, that experience is kind of let loose and unfurled. And then when we have stories about these kind of archetypal figures, it's like all of these different kind of qualities are given voice and color and meaning. And it's a way of kind of finding our way into all of these different aspects of the enlightened mind. And it's interesting then what that means is that we can really follow our inspiration as well. So like I said, for me particularly, a way into Virochana was the color white, and also a fascination with the ideal of human communication. So initially I was fascinated by the fact that the Buddha could just talk to whoever's in front of him and communicate in a very, very, very kind of incredibly effective way with whoever was in front of him. That to me was fascinating. But in a sense then, that quality is embodied also in the archetypal Buddha of Virochana as well. So I sort of tried to answer that question, but what I would say as well is read about those figures and investigate them for yourself, and see if you can find, what it is that fascinates you about the enlightenment experience through investigating those figures. I particularly recommend, there's a book by an order member called Vasantra called Meeting the Buddhas, and I particularly recommend reading that book. But yeah, I hope that's answered your question in some way at least.
Plenty more questions.
Okay, yeah.
So one from Emma about how do you deal when you're trying to communicate ethically with somebody who's argumentative, or pushing your buttons, in quotation marks.
That's an interesting question. So a question from Emma: how do you communicate with somebody, or how do you try to practice the speech precepts, or how do you try to be ethically positive when you're communicating with somebody who's very difficult or argumentative, or who is, in inverted commas, pushing your buttons? Well, I think the important thing about this is to go back to what I was talking about, which is mindfulness and awareness. So mindfulness of self to begin with. So all we can do is take responsibility. All you can do, all one can do in that situation is take responsibility for oneself. So we're not responsible for other people's mental states. We can't control whether somebody else is argumentative or is difficult. But what we can do is ask ourselves, okay, is there a way in which, what's my part in this? Is there some way in which I have a part to play in this? And is there something that I can do in order to either facilitate a better communication, or if not, just recognizing that there's a limit to our responsibility, basically. And that may even mean, possibly, I mean, again, it's a bit like I was saying before, it's very, very difficult to give advice generally about, when I don't know you and I don't know the situation, but, that may be even recognizing that there's a dynamic that you're getting locked into, and that actually it's maybe better just not to communicate with that person for a period of time. So it's hard to get into giving sort of specific advice, but I think the primary thing is for us to take responsibility for ourselves, and to come back to mindfulness and self-awareness, basically. I mean, some situations are very, very powerful, aren't they? I remember having a conversation with a friend about this, and I have quite a good relationship with my family generally, and I don't have a particularly problematic relationship with my family. But it's only quite recently, like, what I would find is, until relatively recently, if I would go back and visit family, like visit my mum in particular, I would somehow feel that I was getting drawn into a particular dynamic there, where it's almost sometimes like I'm the 15-year-old boy again, and she's my mum, just about to tell me to tidy my room or something like that. And that's just because there's so much conditioning there, and that's so much who I was for such a long time. And it takes a while sometimes to get beyond that conditioning. And sometimes that happens in time and sometimes it doesn't. But the primary thing is to come back to ourselves, awareness, and knowing where our responsibility begins and ends as well. Yeah.
Okay.
More questions? Yeah. Yeah.
So from Kevin, he's saying he often finds that people don't listen to each other in conversations. Shouldn't there be an equal emphasis on right listening?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, that's what I'm talking about when I mean receptivity as well, is certainly it's not just about the words that we say. It's actually about being able to listen properly. And I think this is what I was saying just a few minutes ago about the color white, is that's what it symbolizes, is this receptivity. And we need to learn how to listen, and we need to learn when is the right time to speak and when is the right time to be quiet. I mean, partly that's sort of temperamental, isn't it? Some people, I think, what you'll sometimes find is, say, in conversation, for example, some people are naturally just prone to speaking more. I mean, because of what I'm doing this evening, I'm kind of on a bit of a monologue for an hour, but like my natural thing in conversation is I prefer generally to listen rather than to speak. I'm quite happy being with people that like to talk more, and that's just a temperamental thing. But the primary thing is to bring an awareness to that, basically. So we're aware of, if we're speaking, as far as possible, we're aware of, why we're speaking, what our motivation is, whether what we're likely to say is going to bring some benefit, or what the effect of that is, and then also the effect on the other person as well. And listening is a big part of that, for sure. Yeah. Okay.
A couple of questions about archetypes again.
Mm-hmm.
So, from Isaac, are archetypal Buddhas similar to Jung's work with the archetypes? And from Julie, is an archetypal Buddha the same as a bodhisattva?
So what was the first bit again?
The first question was to do with are archetypal Buddhas similar to Carl Jung's archetypes?
Okay.
And the second was...
So I'll just tackle the first one first. So the first question was, are the archetypal Buddhas the same as Jung's archetypes? So I guess so, in the sense that the word means roughly the same thing, doesn't it? I mean, I'm no expert on this at all. But archetypal, as far as I understand it, meaning... I can feel myself digging a bit of a hole here already. Meaning something from consciousness that is sort of universal and has a kind of a deep value that we can tap into. And I think that's what Jung meant when he talks about, sort of archetypes of the unconscious and so on. And that's certainly been my experience with, for example, meditating on Virochana, or this experience that I was talking about with Virochana, for example, it's not something that I've conjured up from my imagination, nor is it objectively true. It seems to be something deep in my consciousness that needs to be given the right conditions in order to come forth, basically. And as far as I understand it, that's what Jung was talking about as well. But I'm no expert on Jung. Although I have to say, I did write my dissertation on Jungian theories of archetypes of the unconscious in Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse when I was an undergraduate. So there we are. But I wouldn't consider myself an expert on Jung. There we are. Sorry, I just had to get that one in there. And then the next one was...
are they the same as bodhisattvas?
Are they the same as bodhisattvas? Yes. So yes, in the sense that you have some archetypal bodhisattvas. And then it's interesting with Buddha figures, you have the Buddha who is a human being, and then you have the archetypal Buddhas. And then with bodhisattvas, you have kind of archetypal bodhisattvas, but then it's also possible to say that there are people who are living bodhisattvas as well. So interestingly, Sangharakshita, one of his main teachers was a Tibetan teacher called Dada Rinpoche. And he said that he considered Dada Rinpoche a living bodhisattva. So one could be a bodhisattva living and breathing on this earth, or you can have bodhisattvas in their archetypal form as well. Yeah.
Okay. Another question. Putting it crudely, this is Isaac again.
Yeah.
Are the precepts something like the Ten Commandments?
That's a very, very good question. So are the precepts something like the Ten Commandments? The answer is no, and it's very, very important to say that they're not like the Ten Commandments. So commandments are very, very different from precepts. So the precepts, as I hope I've communicated somehow, are sort of training principles, and that's the key point, is that the precepts are principles rather than commandments. So, a commandment would be something like, thou shalt not kill. Whereas the Buddhist training precept would be, I undertake the training principle to abstain from causing harm. Now, what the precepts demand of us is a level of awareness in how we go about practicing them. So there's no hard and fast rules. There's no commandment as such. So it may be that in one particular set of circumstances, one needs to do X, and then it's conceivable that in another set of circumstances, one needs to do Y, rather than, you must always do this and you must never do this. We have to, and this is why it's so important to that the practice of the precepts demands that we deepen our awareness and we move more and more and more towards wisdom, because it's only with awareness and wisdom that we know what is right in one situation and what's wrong in another. So broadly speaking, causing somebody physical harm, or, for example, it would mean that most Buddhists are vegetarian or vegan, for example. But it's not just a case of saying, okay, you must do this and you mustn't do this. One needs to develop wisdom and one needs to develop awareness. And also, the key thing about it is it puts the responsibility back on you. So you have to take responsibility for your own ethical conduct. You're not doing it because somebody's told you to do something or not do something. One has to practice the precepts. And as you practice the precepts, you see the benefit or the harm that causes. And as you align yourself more and more, and as you develop more wisdom, it becomes painful to do that, or it becomes pleasurable to bring benefit in that way. So naturally, what then happens is we gravitate towards wanting to practice the precepts. So it's really not the same as somebody saying you mustn't do that, because if you do that, you're a bad person, or you'll be I don't know, wrong in the eyes of God or something like that. So Buddhism doesn't believe in a creator God, and we have precepts, not commandments. So I can see why one would draw a comparison, but they're very, very different things. Yeah. Okay, so maybe time for a couple more questions.
Okay, slightly related to that question.
Mm-hmm.
It came up very, very early when you were talking about drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
So Sasha's asking, does this mean Buddhists shouldn't drink alcohol?
Well, again, you see, what you have there is Buddhists shouldn't drink alcohol. Well, I guess the question is, according to whom? So there's so nobody's going to police that for you. And one needs to make a decision. One needs to make a decision based on one's life, knowing what you know, with the level of awareness that you have, hopefully moving towards these higher values, about whether drinking alcohol has a place in that. So for myself, I used to be quite a heavy drinker, and I started drinking less when I was in my late 20s. And then I chose to, quite some time ago, completely abstain from alcohol, and I don't drink at all now. And I plan not to ever again. But I know Buddhists who might have a glass of wine with a meal or something like that, or might have the odd drink, or might toast somebody if they're at a wedding with a glass of champagne or something like that. I would imagine that. I know for myself that heavy drinking is kind of incompatible with being a Buddhist. But there are Buddhists in history, again, that were heavy drinkers. So it's not as simple as saying you should or shouldn't. As I was saying before with the precepts, one needs to take responsibility for that. But as I was also saying in the first half, the reason why there's a precept around not taking intoxicants, which there is because the more we're intoxicated, then the less we're able to make a clear decision about something. And the more likely it is that we're in the sway of our own selfishness or our own kind of delusional way of thinking about things. So as Buddhists, what we're trying to move towards is greater clarity, greater compassion, and greater wisdom. And from my way of thinking, alcohol is not compatible with that. But again, it wouldn't be a case of, you shouldn't. It would be a case of making a decision according to your own experience. And reflection is really, really important as well as part of that. Reflect on your experience of practicing the precepts, and reflect on what your experience is of doing something like that, and make a decision based on it. Yeah. Okay, we maybe got time for one more question, Yanadaya.
Yeah, I'm just trying to kind of make a bit of sense of. There's one that's coming from Toby, and he might need to just clarify a bit more.
Is that Toby Jones?
Toby Jones.
Oh, hello, Toby Jones.
So, are there teaching around indirect communication? For example, sharing kind, compassionate and critical readings about somebody who seems likely to react. I don't know that.
Say that again?
So are there teachings around indirect communication?
Yeah.
So, for example, sharing kind, compassionate, critical readings about somebody who seems like to react. I don't
Okay.
quite.
I'm not quite sure what the question is, Toby, but I'll do my best to answer it anyway. I mean, indirect communication. And you're saying about, so Toby's saying like something like sharing some readings with somebody or something like that. So that may be, I don't know, maybe gently trying to drop a hint to somebody or to try to inspire them to be different by indirectly sort of pointing them towards something. I don't know if there are teachings around that. I mean, because I know you, Toby, I can maybe be a bit more daring on this one. I'm not sure. I mean, it sounds like maybe what you're saying is that something needs to be said, but you don't want to say it directly. I'm not sure. But a lot of our communication is indirect a lot of the time, isn't it? I mean, I think, how we're communicating around somebody speaks volumes a lot of the time. It's not just about how we sort of communicate directly with somebody. So perhaps indirect communication in that sense could be more effective than sort of gently sort of trying to influence someone. Because if they're not going to be receptive to you directly, I'm not sure that they will be indirectly. Although without getting more information from you, I'm not sure if that is exactly what you're looking for. But okay, so maybe we'll end with the questions there. So thanks, everyone. Good questions. I find it very, very helpful answering questions as well. I hope you found it helpful. It's sort of, I always find that it kind of draws out the what I'm talking a little bit and gives some very useful sort of different angles on things. So that's very, very helpful. So thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to say a couple more things, and then we'll have another short period of meditation, and then we'll end with, I'm going to read some verses called the transference of merit and self-surrender. So just to say that some of you are here because you're on the Road to Full Potential course, and as part of that course, we'll be having talks every evening. And there's meditations every morning, and there's Qigong and yoga going on. Tune in for the meditation tomorrow morning. And tomorrow evening, Paramabandhu is going to be talking about how do we work with our mind. Excuse me. How do we work with our mental states? So in a way, taking what I've talked about this evening and sort of expanding on that and talking about the practice of Buddhist ethics and how do we develop more awareness? How do we work with our minds? So tune in for that tomorrow evening at 7:00. And then the last thing that I want to say before we go into the meditation is just to make an appeal to you. I started off talking about the Buddha this evening and talking about his relationship with Ananda and talking about his vision. And I was thinking, it's being inspired by the vision of the Buddha is what brought me along to the Buddhist Center. And if this center wasn't here, I don't know what my life would be like. I mean, I've changed a huge amount since I've become involved with Triratna and become involved in the LBC. And it's just been very, very beautiful and very, very transformational for me. So I really, really love this place and I really love this community. And I hope that for some of you, you found something similar. You found something of value, that you're appreciating what you're tuning into or what you're hearing. And at the moment, one of the ways that you can show that appreciation is by supporting us financially. So if you were coming to the center, you could contribute to classes and so on. But at the moment, everything that we're doing is online. So I'd really urge you to consider supporting us. Some of you I know have given towards this course already. And what we're asking for is if people who are doing the course can give £50 for that. which doesn't seem like a lot of money, I think, for a week-long course. So consider giving £50 if you're doing the course, and even better than that, if you haven't already done that, and you can set up a monthly direct debit, that would be fantastic. So if you were to set up a direct debit for, say, £30 a month or £40 a month or more, however much your generosity takes you to. And that really, really helps the centre with their finances. So Hippolyte, who's helping us out this evening, is also our treasurer. And he's told us rather alarmingly that because of the government's support and so on coming to an end, it looks like if things don't change, then the centre is going to be losing about £10,000 a month very soon. So what that means is we'd have to start paying our expenses by going into reserves. So we don't want to be in that situation. So I know that there's 1,000 of you roughly who've booked onto this course. So if those of you that haven't set up a monthly direct debit are able to do that, that would be great. And none of that goes towards paying people or paying, exorbitant salaries for people. It just goes on doing this sort of thing, making the Dharma available to people. I know I've benefited hugely. I hope you have. And if you want to, sort of move that forwards and enable that to help more people to access the Dharma, then your financial help would be very much appreciated. So I think Hippolyte's going to put something in the chat. There's a very easy link that you can just click on to do that. And if you're thinking about doing that, I would just say do it now, or not right now, because we're going to meditate. But you can do it now or do it by the end of the evening, so that you don't, it doesn't sort of fall to the bottom of your virtual to-do list. Okay, so thanks very much, and we'll settle down for just a period of short meditation, and then I'll read the refuges and precepts, the transference of merit and self-surrender. And what we're doing in the transference of merit and self-surrender is any benefit that we've gained from what we've been doing this evening. We're giving that back to all beings. We're not keeping it for ourselves. We're paying that forwards, and we're offering that up for the benefit of all. Okay. So just sitting quietly for a couple of minutes first. And just tuning into the breath, tuning into the body. And just finishing the evening quietly, just deepening our awareness. And perhaps we can bring others to mind. Start to send well-wishing out to people in the world that need it, people that are suffering, people that are having difficulty, and actually just all beings. Just wishing all beings well. Opening our hearts and letting metta and loving kindness flow out from our hearts to other beings. So I'll say the transference of merit and self-surrender. And you could repeat that. So I'll say a line, and then you could say a line. And even if you're just on your own at home, try joining in with that. It's a lovely thing to do, and it'll be a lovely way to end. And Hippolyte and Yanadaya will join in here in the shrine room. And then once we've done that, that's where we'll end the evening. Transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained.
May the merit gained.
In my acting thus.
In my acting thus.
go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences.
My personality throughout my existences.
My possessions.
My possessions.
And my merit in all three ways.
And my merits in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself.
I give up without regard to myself.
For the benefit of all beings.
For the benefit of all beings.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Are serviceable in many ways.
Are serviceable in many ways.
To the infinite number of beings.
To the infinite number of beings.
Inhabiting limitless space.
Inhabiting limitless space.
So may I become.
So may I become.
That which maintains all beings.
That which maintains all beings.
Situated throughout space.
Situated throughout space.
So long as all have not attained.
So long as all have not attained.
To peace.
To peace.
Okay, thank you everyone. Wish you all well.